Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Showing Up to Life podcast and YouTube channel. Art Burns here, you there. Hope you're all having a wonderful day today, and I hope that you're meeting the day. I shouldn't say you're having a wonderful day. I hope that you're meeting the day with acceptance and with tolerance and with forgiveness, because this is how to make it a wonderful day, right? That's the thing, right? Life is not about getting things the way we want them to be. Right? That is not what brings us happiness. Happiness comes from the ability to accept the way things are. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't be changed, right? But when we can accept the way things are in the present moment, this allows us to come into a place of well-being, which is essentially another word for happiness, right? Which is essentially where all the positive emotions come from. Right. And so I wanted to talk about that today, right? That this notion of positivity, right? And this, both segments today, as you may remember, I'm trying to do these podcasts and trying to figure out how to kind of do two different segments. It's not really working out so well, but we're going to keep trying. But today it's kind of like a 1 and 1A. So the segments are going to really meld together, right? So let's first talk about this notion of positivity, right? Because this is something that is really, really rampant in our society, and it really is something to understand, right? Because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about it in its rampant use in society. And what I'm talking about mostly is this idea of positive emotions or positive vibes, right? And how we can manifest more positive actions in our lives by a positive attitude in our lives. Now, first things first, it's not like there's no truth to this, right? There's a strong element of truth to this, in fact, right? However, I think in a lot of cases, it maybe, again, I think there's maybe not a pure understanding of it. And so therefore the truth that it has starts to get a little warped and a little morphed into something that is not so much true anymore. And that's where we get into this place of toxic positivity. That's the second segment here. Okay. So let's talk about positivity in and of itself for a moment. Okay. Positive, there's even a whole school of psychology called positive psychology. And it's, one of the foremost, minds in this field is a woman who I, reference all the time, who is Barbara Friedrichsen, right? And she is somebody who is just an amazing mind in this world and just brilliant, right? And she's a positive psychology researcher, I think she would call herself. I don't think she does clinical psychology where she meets with people, but it's all research-based, right? So she's a positive psychology researcher. Pardon me. And so there is certainly there's a whole field out there devoted to positive psychology. So there has to be some kind of truth to it. I mean, technically it doesn't have to be, but it's hard to imagine that a number of psychologists, that many psychologists, this whole field of it, that that it's completely wrong. It's hard to believe that, right? And the first person who was really the pioneer of this thing that we call positive psychology is a guy by the name of Martin Seligman, right? And he's done a number of really interesting studies, right? He did one study that was done with the MetLife insurance company, right? And I'm going to try to remember the details. I'm sure I'm not going to remember the exact numbers per se, but we can go look that up. What he did, MetLife was having a hard time, recruiting new brokers, right? And at a certain point, I think it was in the early 90s, right? And there was a point where they were like, we can't find qualified, candidates to be brokers, to sell people insurance, right? And so what Martin Seligman did was he reviewed their process of how they, find their recruits and the sort of criteria by which they are, kind of evaluate their recruits, right? and what he suggested that MetLife do, right, was to take so everybody who fell below that line, right, of their overall score. Like they did not make the cut for who you expected, or for the people that you expect to hire for your company, right? They didn't make that cut in a matter of, several different criteria, right? But what I want you to do, Martin said to MetLife, is to lower the threshold only for those people who score high on optimism on the evaluation, the criteria, the thing that you're using to evaluate these people, right? So what he found was that the people who came in, who were hired, who normally wouldn't have made the cut, but they scored high in optimism, that he found that those people in the first year, what they did was they outsold their counterparts, the people who did make the cut. They outsold those people by like something like, I want to say like 10%, right? But in the second year, it was like 30 or 40% higher, right? Because these people believed in their ability, they actually performed better. And it's really telling that the percentage went up in the second year, because the first year, everybody's excited, right? Even the people who were, higher in that level, everybody feels like, oh yeah, I can do this. I have no reason to believe that I can't do this, right? So that first year was relatively flat, but in the second year, that optimistic group shot way up. This is reminiscent of the quote from Henry Ford, right? It says that if you believe you can do a thing or you believe you can't do that thing, you're right, right? Because that's the idea, that optimism, the belief that we can actually do something, is absolutely crucial to being able to do that thing, right? Like that, it's absolutely crucial, right? So all of this positive psychology is based on real science and is very valid, right? So where does it become something that's a beneficial thing, this optimism that's very beneficial to us? Where does it go from that to something that might be not so beneficial, something that we might call toxic positivity, right? Well, the answer lies, and I'm going to try not to jump ahead here, but the answer lies in, how much are we ignoring the negative because we're afraid of it, right? Are we clinging to the positive because we convince ourselves that we must be positive, right? And really, what's the downfall of this positive this toxic positivity, right? And when I say the toxic positivity, what I'm talking about is there's a lot of folks out there who believe that no, if you feel anger, that's bad. You shouldn't ever feel anger, right? You shouldn't ever feel sadness, because then you're not going to manifest a beautiful life for yourself, right? Like that's the point at which this becomes toxic positivity, right? Because the reality is that the negative emotions that we feel, right, they're not something to be avoided. They're not something to be shunned. They're not something to be ignored. Because the negative emotions that we feel are actually very, very helpful to us, right? All the emotions we feel are helpful to us. But it's in their totality that the help is there, right? Like you could say that positive emotions are helpful to us and negative emotions are helpful to us. So therefore, if we only have the positive emotions, then it's still helpful. But no, that's really not how it works. It's the completion, it's the mosaic of emotions, that some are negative and some are positive. That's what makes for a healthy mind, right? So it is actually in the fact that there are negative emotions that make us, that allow us to benefit from the positive emotions, right? It might be a little bit of a brain tease here, but please bear with me here, okay? Because what's happening in your emotions, right, is your emotions are there to motivate you, okay? Now, we have some emotions that we call positive emotions, right? Which are the emotions of attraction. These are emotions like attraction, like love, like lust, like, hunger, craving, desire, right? All of these emotions are drawing us closer to something, right? They're pulling us in, right? They're an attraction. They're like I often say here that positive and negative is like the positive and negative poles of a battery or a magnet, right? There is one side of a magnet that draws in a magnet to attach to it. If you flip the magnet around, it's a negative. It pushes the other magnet away, right? And so so that's where we go into feeling that the positive emotions, what the, a big problem that we have, I'm sorry, I know I'm jumping around a little bit here, but a big problem that we have here, and one of the things that leads to the toxic positivity that I'm going to we're going to keep going and get into that in the second smooth segue into the second segment here, right? But the thing that creates that sort of the toxicity of the positive emotions, right, is when we believe that when we label the emotions as either good emotions or bad emotions, that's where we start to get hung up on things, okay? Because the emotion of anger is indeed a negative emotion, right? Again, we have the positive emotions that are drawing us into things. We have the negative emotions that are pushing us away from things. So anger is, I'm going to, bare my fangs. I'm going to growl. I'm going to, have an aggressive posture. I'm going to try to push this thing that's causing my anger away from me, right? Or it's motivating me to take some drastic action, right? Same thing with fear, right? Fear is not a bad emotion. It's a very, very helpful emotion, but it is a negative emotion because if I'm afraid of something, I want to be away from that thing, right? So therefore, it's not about, feeling it's not about only feeling the positive emotions because those are the good emotions, right? What it is about allowing the negative emotion to exist so that we can allow it to motivate us back to the positive emotions. Okay, because positive emotions are associated with well-being, right? If you're in a place of happiness, you're in a place of feeling love, you're in a place of attraction, right? It's even translated to the nervous system, right? The nervous system, when we call it the fight or flight response, that's when our nervous system is activated in the sympathetic nervous system. We're all revved up, right? But when we go into the parasympathetic nervous system and we come down from all that stuff, they call it the rest and digest, right? So it's when we get back to that place of wellness and well-being, that's when we're healing, that's when we're processing things properly, that's when we are being well. So it's not about ignoring the negative emotions. It's about allowing those negative emotions to propel us back to the positive state of our being. All right, folks, that's the end of this first segment. I'm going to stop the video. I'm going to record another one for the second segment. All right, be right back. All right, everybody, welcome back for segment 2 of this beautiful podcast here and YouTube channel. Oh man, I just realized I don't think I can do 2 videos on one YouTube. I can do 2 segments of recording on the podcast, but oh man, I think I just found a hole in my plan. But anyway, let's move forward. Let's see what happens. Okay, so what exactly, in the last segment we talked about this notion of positive psychology and how this can morph into something that could be toxic positivity, right? And so what makes it toxic? That's what I want to know, right? Or that's what I want to explore here. I know it and I want you to know it, right? What makes it toxic, right? And so to me, in my opinion, in my informed opinion, is that the thing that makes it toxic, right? Like, what is toxicity? Toxicity is something that hurts us, right? It's poison to us, right? It's something that if we ingest this thing, it's it doesn't help us, right? It's a bad thing, right? And so, so again, this notion of optimism is a very positive thing, right? It's almost like a beneficial food we might eat, right? It's not poison. It's not something that is bad, right? It's not something that's harmful, right? However, if we become overly optimistic, well, then it becomes toxic, right? And right. So there's a point at which too much becomes negative for us, right? It becomes something not negative in terms of the negative and positive emotions that I talked about before, but something that's detrimental to our well-being, right? Something that hurts us, right? Something that is toxic, right? And so again, but the toxicity doesn't just come from the abundance of optimism, right? There are lots of people who are overly optimistic and they're not unwell, right? They're still in a positive and healthy or beneficial place, right? So what is it about the positive vibe thing and all that kind of stuff? What is it about that makes us that makes it toxic, right? And to me, in my informed opinion, is the answer lies in how we address, but how we move ourselves from negative emotions to positive emotions. Okay. And this is very, very important here. Okay. Because this is really, it's an essential truth that, again, I don't think a lot of people realize this, and it's really, really important to understand this. Okay. So here's the thing, right? If you're feeling a negative emotion, and the other thing is that, like, again, it's impossible to live a life without negative emotions, right? Not only is it impossible, but you don't want to try. It's really not good it's really unhealthy for you. Okay. So it's not about never feeling negative emotions, because again, that's impossible, right? And even if it's possible, it's really, really unhealthy. So I know I just repeated myself, but that was worth the repeat. Okay. So when we feel a negative emotion, right? If we believe that we must be positive in order for our lives to work, right? If we believe that, only in the place of positive vibes are we going to manifest the good things in our lives, only in the place of positive emotions are we going to be happy, only, all that stuff, right? If we go into our moment by moment experience with that belief that that's the way things have to be, it's either positive or it's a failure, right? Well, what this does is this sets up the negative mental states that we talk about here a lot, right? Now, the negative mental states are delusion, which gives way to aversion and clinging. Okay, so let's take that, let's unpack that. Okay, so delusion, right, is the inability to see things for what things really are, right? And when we're sitting here thinking that, negative emotions are bad and positive emotions are good, well, we're already in a delusion, right? Because it's not true, right? That just simply is not the way the world works, right? So from that delusion, right, when we think that negative emotion, and that's what people who are in this like sort of positive, again, taking positive psychology to the nth degree, right? This whole idea of like, just shun the negative emotions, stay free from them. If you feel angry, you're doing something wrong, that kind of thing, right? When we go into our moment by moment experience in that mindset, right? What we're then doing is we're setting up the aversion and the clinging, right? Because the minute we realize that, or the minute we believe that negative emotions are bad and positive emotions are good, then anytime we feel a negative emotion, we're judging it as something bad, right? And when we judge that as something bad, right, now we're setting up that clinging and aversion, right? We're setting up either the clinging to, I got to get back to a positive emotion. Like, I can't be feeling this negative emotion. This is terrible. I got to cling to that idea of getting to a positive place, right? Or, depending on the way your mind works, is these really just two ways, and, it's just a opposing directional thing, but it's the same aspect, right, of non-acceptance, right? And so either I'm feeling this clinging to the positive emotions, like I can't feel these negative emotions because I'm clinging to the positive ones, or I'm feeling aversion to the negative emotions. Like, no, this is terrible. I cannot be feeling this. I got to get away from this, right? Again, it's just two sort of modalities of the same action, right? But what happens here, right? And this goes back into, psychology that Buddhist practitioners have been using for 2,500 years, okay? Which very much matches up with our own psychology, right? Our own meaning modern Western psychology, right? Because it's not our psychology. Psychology is just understanding what's going on, right? But they definitely do link up, right? So the idea then is that from a place of delusion, aversion, or clinging, otherwise known as, sometimes these are called ignorance, hatred, and greed, right? There's different sort of words that they use for them, but basically it's the same thing, right? When I'm feeling that, when I'm in one or more of those three mental states, right, there is nothing but negative emotions that are going to come out of those three negative states, right? Nothing, right? If I'm delusional about the way the world is really happening, then I'm going to come out with when the world shows me that it is really happening the way that it's really happening, but my delusion is not believing it, I'm going to experience negative emotions, right? I'm going to experience some kind of disappointment. I'm going to experience some kind of fear, some kind of anger, some kind of frustration, jealousy, envy, any of those things, right? If I'm in a place of clinging or in a place of aversion, well, those are rooted in fear, which is the primary negative emotion, right? So the point then is that when we are not accepting whatever is happening and whatever negative emotion is going on, right? When we're not accepting that, but instead we're engaging in that delusion, aversion, or clinging, what we're actually doing is we're creating negative emotions, right? We're actually generating and causing negative emotions to happen, right? So in your quest to become more optimistic and more positive, right, you're actually creating negative emotions, which are keeping you from doing that thing that you're doing, right? And the problem is that a lot of people will spend years and years and years in this place of delusion, of thinking that I just have to be positive. As long as I'm positive, everything is going to be okay, right? And so when you're in that level of delusion, again, life is eventually going to show you the other way, right? Life is eventually going to throw that cold water in your face and make you a believer, right? Because things just can't keep going your way over and over and over again, right? It's just not possible that you can only experience positive emotions. That's just not a life that we live in this world, right? Unless, again, we're being so caught up in our delusion that we're escaping life, right? We're bypassing life, right? Now, what happens then is that when we spend all that time being in that place of delusion, and then we're hit with the stark reality of the truth of the way the world works, and it happens eventually, then it becomes crushing. Then we go into a tailspin of negative emotions. Then we go into a deep depression or a deep anxiety. And then it's a long road out. And then it can actually become traumatic. It can become traumatizing, is the way I should say that. And so again, right, it's how do we, because, and now here's the thing also, right, and this is very important to understand, right, and this is where that sort of, there is a kernel of truth in that, in what ultimately comes toxic positivity, right, is that the idea is that when we are in a negative emotion, right, again, that's associated with the sympathetic nervous system, right, the things of fear and anxiety and jealousy and envy and all those things that are going to make us feel that, oh man, something's wrong here, I got to move, I got to get out of this, right, because this is, I'm not comfortable, I don't feel right, right, that is your body trying to drive you to a place of equanimity, and that equanimity comes from the positive emotions. Okay. So that's why, yes, they're somewhat right that the idea is to get from the negative emotions into the positive emotions. Because if we dwell only in the negative emotions, that's toxic negativity, right? So neither one in extreme is any good for us, right? What we need is a balance and a blend of the two, right? We need an equanimity between the two, right? We need a balance, right? And so then the question comes like, okay, Art, so, it almost seems like you're contradicting yourself here, right? Because you're saying that we don't want to move from negative emotion, we want to experience the negative emotions, but yet we want to move to the positive emotions. What the heck are you talking about, Art? I'm glad you asked. I'm really glad you asked, right? So when we feel the negative emotions, right, we can allow those negative emotions to exist, right? We don't have to change them right away, right? We can sit in that space of negative emotions, right? And then we can recognize that that negative emotion that we're experiencing is actually very helpful to us, right? The feeling of emotional pain, the feeling of emotional, whether it's anger or grief or shame or any of these emotions, they are helping me, right? They're either helping me to keep safe, or they're helping me to achieve something, or they're helping me to become more aware of a danger, right? These are all positive things these are all, sorry to use that word positive, but they're all helpful things. They're all beneficial things to me. And so once I can hold that notion of these things being beneficial, now I'm feeling a positive emotion, right? I'm feeling gratitude. I'm feeling compassion. I'm feeling kindness. So now all of a sudden I'm naturally moving into a positive place from which place I can get things done in my life. I can accomplish goals and find my, well-being, right? Now find my happiness, because your happiness is within you, right? Your happiness is what is allowed to happen when we break free of the clinging and the aversion and the delusion of all this stuff. And so your happiness is in that gratitude and that kindness and that compassion that you're feeling. But it doesn't mean that we got rid of the anger or the shame or whatever that emotion was, right? We didn't banish it. We didn't get rid of it. We didn't poison it. So therefore, the positivity that comes from feeling gratitude for this thing that happened to us is actually a beautiful and healthy positivity. It is not a poisonous positivity. If you'd like to talk more about this, I would like to talk more with you about this. So hit up the link in the comments and the description that is for your free coaching session. It's already sitting there in your name. All you got to do is claim it by clicking the link below. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed this 2-segment format. I'll talk to you soon. Take care, everybody.